In Mississippi this morning, but its effects are felt across 4 states. George brings high winds and extremely heavy rain, and with the slow speed of the storm, the southeast faces a threat of severe flooding. Good Monday morning. I'm Rick Griffin, along with Dr. Steve Lyons, our hurricane expert here at the update desk. We'll have more in just a moment. First, let's go to our information map and show you the current position of George, which is right on the Mississippi coastline. That is where the eye is located now. In fact, there are reports of calm conditions in the eye right along the Gulf Coast of Mississippi. 30.2 north, 88.8 west. That's near Biloxi, Mississippi. Top sustained winds of 105, but we have had unofficial wind gusts of much worse conditions than that. We'll talk about that unofficial wind gust in just a moment. The movement of the storm slowly north-northwest, the pressure 962 millibars. Hurricane warnings remain in effect this morning from Morgan City, Louisiana, eastward to Panama City, Florida. Well, let's go right into southern Mississippi. We have a Weather Channel crew live on the scene. It's Jim Cantori. Let's get the latest from Jim.
Good morning, Rick. I'm standing underneath the balcony here of the Holiday Inn Express on the 2nd floor, and we're going to pan out and show you the hurricane force winds and the very heavy rainfall that's coming down tonight. And I'll pass along the information that we have to you. Just about 2.5 hours ago, we lost power here. It was amazing. It was like the 4th of July. It was unbelievable. All the transformers blowing all around. As a matter of fact, you'll still see an occasional flash, and if you see that, that is a transformer, in fact, blowing. We can't tell from this vantage point how much signage that we've lost, but we have seen a couple of signs lost, especially just across the street. There was an Office Max sign that is bent over pretty well, and that's obviously a sign of some very strong winds. We have heard a report out of Pascagoula tonight, a couple of things. There was a report that a shelter lost its roof containing 90 people there. We have not received further word on that. Also, there is a chemical smell down in Pascagoula. About 3 people have called in now on the local radio station and reported this smell. And what I'm smelling here in Gulfport is the smell of pine. And this is something that you usually smell when you're having a lot of tree damage and whatnot. And that's kind of the image we're getting by talking to local police this morning. They're telling us there's a lot of trees down and there's power lines down all over the place. Obviously, this area without power from Gulfport down through Biloxi, even into Ocean Shores, where several callers have called in and stated that they have lost power this morning, and they are also seeing a calm now with the eye passing over. Our storm tracker truck shows a pressure now of 970 millibars, which gives us an idea that we're pretty close to the center, with the pressure being about 962 from last guess. And you can see here as this car, probably a police officer, no one else should be out on the road tonight, drives down the road, just the intensity of that rainfall out ahead of them. Our wind's basically out of the north right now, due north wind. So yes, the center pretty much on off to our east. So an absolutely miserable morning here, tremendous power loss, and no doubt we're going to find a lot of damage once that sun comes up. Back to you, Rick.
Jim Cantori, Gulfport, Mississippi. Well, again, George making landfall this morning. So let's get the latest information from our hurricane expert, Dr. Steve Lyons. Steve, we watched Biloxi, Mississippi report a wind gusts of 126 miles per hour. Unofficially, we've had higher wind gusts than that. We're still trying to confirm that. In any event, George appeared to intensify right around landfall, but probably will not strengthen anymore from here.
Sure won't if it stays over land. It's almost sitting on the coast, and actually wobbled very slightly to the west, which just makes the agony all that much worse and more prolonged. We do still think it's going to head in a general northward direction as it was, but it's sitting right on the coast.
Well, the worst conditions obviously missed New Orleans as they were west of the eye, but just east of the eye this morning where it's coming on shore, extreme southeast Mississippi, Pascagoula area, and over into southern Alabama, the storm surge must be very significant.
Yeah, we expect here on the east side of the eye here, the locations right in this area near the eye wall, water elevations probably 10 to 15 feet, and they could be higher than that locally, but probably in the 10 to 15 foot range near the coast.
I think we have a graphic showing the maximum storm surge heights with a direct hit on Gulfport and Biloxi.
That's right. You can see here the top end of a Category 2 would be about 10 feet, and then locally in some locations that are well exposed to the coast that funnel water in, they could be a little higher than that. So we expect widespread flooding there right near the coast and on to the east as well in combination with the rain.
Well, the Mobile Doppler radar this morning shows George very plainly, the eye right in here, and apparently, Steve, there are reports of calm with the actual eye, but don't let your guard down and be aware that very turbulent conditions will be returning.
Absolutely. We got calm conditions reported near Ocean Springs, which is basically right where we think the eye is right now. It's somewhere right in this general area. And you can see it's not moving very much, so be very careful if you're out there. Here's a close-up version of it, and you'll see if we get the loop going here on it, it's actually almost stationary at the coast the last hour or so, or if anything, drifting ever so slowly just westward a little bit. So stay indoors and stay hunkered down. The worst is going to last for a while.
Okay, just to orientate our viewers here, the Florida Panhandle and southern Alabama, this is Mobile Bay, and you probably think the worst storm surge conditions are just east of the eye and extreme southeast Mississippi.
Right, in this orange band of strong convection. And notice some of this strong stuff is wrapping around to the west side, and Jim Cantori is showing the rain in that. Keep in mind the winds on the west side are not too bad, but they're bad enough to produce some widespread power outages in the greater New Orleans area. Not necessarily downtown, we don't know exactly where they are, but some of the areas out in here in the parishes are experiencing significant power outages, which is typical of a hurricane.
And there are other problems in New Orleans. The airport's closed and many of the major interstates are closed at this point. Well, flooding is going to be a big concern. We're talking freshwater flooding too. The heavy rainfall and flash flood and flood watches are in effect for these areas. Rainfall potential is extremely heavy. I mean, you were talking last time about the potential for 30 inches of rain, is that right?
That's not impossible if the circulation stays very, very slow. Currently, it's moving roughly at about 5 or 6 miles per hour, and a typical estimate for a tropical cyclone or hurricane would be about 20 inches total. Near the circulation center in the periphery where the heavy rain bands are located. If it slows, it could be more. Of course, if it speeds up, then we'd be down a little bit better. But we've already experienced a lot of rain on the east side, and it's going to persist.
There are unofficial totals of 16, 17 inches from observers, and also Doppler estimated rainfall here, maximums of almost 16 inches of rain already, and there's certainly a lot more to come. Well, Steve, there's another aspect of this hurricane too, and it is the potential for tornadic thunderstorms with the northeast quadrant especially.
That is correct. The circulation center is coming onshore right here, and you can see pretty much near the eye wall and to the east we have a severe thunderstorm warning out. Actually, it's a tornado watch out right now till 1 p.m. and of course that's consistent with the motion here that would take it very little inland in the next 6 hours.
And typically, again, it's this part of the storm in here where the chances of embedded supercell thunderstorms, tornadic thunderstorms, is the greatest.
Yes, occasionally we'll see some right in the eye wall, but it's relatively rare, and usually the wind's so strong there people can't tell the difference between a severe thunderstorm in there and the eye wall winds themselves.
Okay, looking at this radar, where do you expect George to go, and do you expect it to slow down? The steering currents obviously are very weak, and the speed really has a lot to do with how much rainfall.
Well, so far it's gone faster than the official forecast by the National Hurricane Center, which is great news for everybody, but it's still forecast to slow down, and in 72 hours it's not expected to be much farther north than the Jackson-Montgomery line here, which would be absolutely disastrous rain-wise for a lot of areas.
So basically we have high pressure to the north of the hurricane that's going to slow its forward speed.
Slow its forward speed. We're hoping it's going to fall apart in a hurry once it gets on land where all the wind dies away quickly, and then we're just left with a rain event.
Right, okay. Dr. Steve Lyons, will check back with him shortly. Meanwhile, don't forget, if you're away from your television later this morning, you can go online to weather.com and get the latest up-to-date information on Hurricane George and weather everywhere across the nation and around the globe, as a matter of fact. Now back to the studio, and here's Mike Motley.
And this edition of Weather Center sponsored by Red Roof Inns. We're seeing those warmer temperatures in the south, a little cooler in the north, and scattered showers in the portions of the east, very light showers here. Into the heartland, some scattered showers and thunderstorms moving from Kansas City.
Southern Mississippi has sustained a major hit from Hurricane George, and even places where people have gone for refuge have been hurt this morning. We'll give you a live report in just a moment. Stay tuned.
Good morning, I'm Rick Griffin. Welcome to this special edition of Weather Center concerning, of course, Hurricane George, which is battering the north central Gulf of Mexico right now. Wind gusts of over 125 miles per hour have been reported in Biloxi, Mississippi during the last couple of hours. Let's go right now to the latest position update, and in fact I'll read you a position that is 1 hour newer than the graphic you're seeing here. As of 6 o'clock Central Daylight Time, George is now at 30.4 north and 88.9 west. That's very near Biloxi, Mississippi. The eye is very close to, just a little east of Biloxi, Mississippi. Maximum winds remain the same, 105 miles per hour. The pressure has dipped down just slightly to 961 millibars, and the movement of George is off to the north-northwest at near 7 miles an hour. And this motion is expected to continue today with a gradual decrease in forward speed, and that could cause some major problems with flooding rainfall. Hurricane warnings right now in place from Morgan City, Louisiana to Panama City in the state of Florida. Let's go right now to our hurricane expert, Dr. Steve Lyons. He joins me here at the update desk. Dr. Lyons, a very powerful hurricane, the eye right on the coast of Mississippi, and just at landfall there was a little bit of intensification.
It does appear to be that way. Of course, oftentimes we get a report at the surface station at land, and we don't really have the report of a ground site over the open ocean, so a 1 millibar change is probably insignificant at this stage of the game. It's a powerful hurricane though.
But it will begin to weaken now as it's moving inland, and the main concern as the winds die down will become the excessively heavy rainfall.
Rain is the biggest potential, and of course the speed is still moving a little faster than the Hurricane Center had forecast earlier, which is great news rain-wise, but it's still not all that fast. It's moving about 7-8 miles per hour right now. If it slows down below that, the rain could be a catastrophic disaster.
We'll talk more about that in just a second, Steve, as well as the potential for severe weather, and get a little bit more of your analysis in just a bit. First, we have Weather Channel live crews out in the field along the Gulf Coast. We have Kristen Dodd in Pensacola, Florida, and Jim Cantori in Gulfport, Mississippi. Let's go to Jim first.
Good morning, Rick. The picture, not a pretty one here this morning in Gulfport, as we continue to get word of big-time power outages and tree limbs down, power lines down, the kind of damage you expect or would expect with winds of 100 to 120 miles an hour like they had confirmed in Biloxi, Mississippi. I want to read to you some of the latest data as our cameraman Blair Carper pans around with our night vision, and you can see how the wind-whipped rain just continues to pound this area. Now, some of the worst word that we're hearing is in the Front Lot Elementary School shelter and also the Gulf Coast Elementary School shelter. The roofs have blown off there, and all the people have been relocated. No injuries. Now that is in Pascagoula, Mississippi. Roof damage to the Singing River Hospital in Gosher, and no injuries have been reported there. And also we are following a story for you tonight in Pascagoula. Several people calling in reporting the smell of chemicals. So again, just a nasty picture here, and we're on the western side of the storm. The eastern side, the full brunt of that hurricane, Pascagoula, Ocean Shores, those areas just get, Ocean Springs, excuse me, those areas just getting absolutely nailed this morning. What's happening further off to our east where they just got hammered yesterday? Let's find out. Kristen Dodd's in Pensacola. Good morning, Kristen.
Good morning, Jim. I'm glad to hear that you guys are doing okay. The rain continues here, and that is one of the bigger problems here in Pensacola this morning. We have widespread areas, especially in the downtown area, that are now totally covered with water. We've had reports of 17 inches of rain just yesterday, most of that coming in the afternoon hours, and that was from a reporting station in the downtown area. I am just to the east of downtown in a pretty protected area, but the rain is still going to be a problem through the morning hours with flash flooding. We also last night had reports of several tornadoes. One condominium had its roof ripped off, and we had several trees and power lines down. Most of this area is without power at this time, and it's going to be quite a while before we're going to see that back on. So that's causing a problem for us at this hour. As far as what we can expect today, I think we're looking at it. It's going to be a wet one. Back to you, Rick.
All right, Kristen, we are now getting word of damage done by George along the Gulf Coast. In Mississippi, just to repeat, Jim talked a little bit about this, but the storm has damaged 2 shelters. More than 400 people fled to a shelter at a community college west of Pascagoula when the storm ripped off most of the roof, and another 90 people staying inside a school in Pascagoula. There, the roof was ripped off by a possible tornado. Elsewhere along the Gulf Coast, widespread power outages. Airports and highways are closed, and waves have splashed over beachfront roads along US 90. In Louisiana, 100,000 people or more have lost power as the storm has crashed in. A storm surge topped a levee in Florissant, east of New Orleans, letting loose 8 to 9 feet of water, and that's according to the Parish Public Works Department. In New Orleans itself, tens of thousands of people have flocked to the city's 9 shelters, including the Superdome, and New Orleans imposed a curfew overnight, and surrounding towns followed suit. Around New Orleans, most of the major interstates apparently are still closed, plus the airport, and we'll try to keep you up to date on changes in that scenario as the morning unfolds. Right now, though, let's go back to Dr. Steve Lyons, our hurricane expert. And Steve, let's go right to our mobile Doppler radar, which is showing a very distinct structure of Hurricane George.
It sure is. You can see, first of all, one thing to note is all of the very, very heavy rain is east to the center. Center of the circulation is about right here. And so that's a significant information piece right there. To the west of the center, you're not going to get extremely heavy rain in the next few hours anyway, but overall you may still get quite a bit of rain to the west, and you can see that in a close-up here with very strong bands coming in here all the way over from the Florida Panhandle to the Florida border here, Gulfport, and of course in the northern eye wall there, extreme rainfall occurring right now.
Well, basically New Orleans kind of dodged the bullet being on the western side of the eye, but east and northeast of the eye, we've got the excessively heavy rain, the storm surge along the coast, and a severe weather threat too.
Severe weather threat, of course, is associated with these bands as they move out to the north. Of course, some of these bands are going to creep around, and they could come into the greater New Orleans area as well in the next 4 to 6 hours. But for the most part, all the real heavy flooding rain will be to the east.
Okay, and flash flood and flood watches remain in effect. Southeast Louisiana over to the Florida Panhandle, and in Walton County, Florida, flash flood warning is posted. Right now, we look at unofficial totals of well over 15 inches of rain so far. And Steve, you would expect with the slow movement of this hurricane, potentially 30 inches or more of rainfall in some locations.
That's not impossible, and of course you can see here the movement as of the last advisory was at about 5 miles per hour. That gives us an estimate of values upwards of 20 inches. It's since picked up a little bit. If it's moving 8, of course it'd be more like a foot and a half of rain. That's a huge amount of rain. And you can see, as you can see on that Doppler radar image, most of the accumulations are on the east side now. On the west side near New Orleans, we haven't seen too much accumulation in the last, couple of hours. But the thing to keep in mind is that's a very flood-prone area, so they don't need all that much rain over there to really flood.
Okay, and by severe weather, when we mentioned that earlier, obviously the hurricane is very severe, but tornadic thunderstorms. And for that reason, we do have a tornado watch posted for this area in the southeast, including Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida, and adjacent coastal waters until 1 p.m. Central Daylight Time. And Steve, it's the northeast quadrant that's the most concerned. That's where the supercell thunderstorms will be located.
Yes, and the other thing to keep in mind here is as this rain accumulates, that severe weather will really be much easier to topple trees as the soil gets moist. So that's something to keep in mind.
Absolutely. Dr. Steve Lyons. And to repeat once again, Hurricane George battering the north central Gulf Coast. We will have frequent updates, but if you have to go away from your TV, you can get the latest at weather.com. That's our website on the internet. And now back to the studio. Here's Mark Mancuso.
All right, thank you, Rick. And this edition of your current weather and forecast brought to you by Travelers Insurance. Quick recap of yesterday's and today's weather, showing you showers and thunder showers persisting in Missouri this morning. While in the northeast, yesterday's severe activity has gone to bed. But yesterday we saw winds of 70 to 80.
Well, you're looking at a live picture out of Pensacola, Florida, and of course Hurricane George causing all sorts of problems this morning in the Florida Panhandle, the coastal sections of Alabama and southern sections of Mississippi. This is Gulfport, Mississippi right here, and earlier in Biloxi. Very strong winds in excess of 120 miles an hour. Welcome to this special edition of Weather Center. I'm Rick Griffin. The eye of Hurricane George is crossing the Mississippi coast this morning, west of Pascagoula, just east of Biloxi, where that wind gusts in excess of 125 miles per hour was observed earlier this morning. We'll check in with Dr. Steve Lyons, our hurricane expert, in just a moment to find out what's next with George. But first, the current position, which is 30.4 north, 88.9 west, once again near and just east of Biloxi, Mississippi. Top sustained winds, 105. And George continues to move slowly but steadily now off to the north-northwest at 7. And the pressure is 961 millibars. Just briefly to the hurricane warnings, and they remain in effect from Panama City westward to Morgan City, Louisiana. Well, we have 3 Weather Channel live crews in the field. Kristen Dodd is in Pensacola, Jim Cantori in Gulfport, Mississippi, and Bill Keneally in New Orleans, Louisiana. Let's start this time with Jim.
Good morning, Rick. We continue to see very, very heavy rain here now. The wind's starting to die down a little bit, even though just before we came to you, there was an incredible wind swirl that just went by us, and you could see the rain change directions as it went down Highway 49 here. So that could have been a small vortice or even a tornado. Let me show you around. You can see some of the damage now as the sun has come up, and I'm sure it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better, folks, with regards to the damage. These are just some of our first pictures here that we're seeing, but certainly some of the signage, some of the stoplights have been knocked over. Let's take our storm cam shot. You can see that looking at the bottom of your screen there. That's a traffic light. Those things are huge and they weigh a lot, and that thing has been knocked over, and certainly you can still see the power of the wind and the rain as it shakes the existing signal lights around. We have heard reports, especially in Pascagoula, where they were on the eastern side of the storm, where they have received extensive damage at 2 shelters there. 400 people had to be evacuated from those shelters, and no doubt that was not a pretty experience, given the fact that they actually left their homes to get out of harm's way. Problems here continue this morning with the rainfall. Obviously, curfews continue. No power. We haven't had power for 4 hours now, and it was amazing this morning about 3 o'clock in the morning when we lost that power, because it was like July 4th. All the transformers just going all over the place. So no doubt this area reeling a major hit from Hurricane George, possibly the worst one ever since we had Camille back in '69. Well, let's go ahead and see how things are going in Pensacola this morning. Kristen Dodd's there. Good morning, Kristen.
And good morning to you, Jim. Power outage is also a huge problem here. Many areas have spent almost 24 hours without power as George approached the coast yesterday with high winds and also very heavy rainfall, and that caused some big problems. At this hour, we still have some gusty winds. I'm on the west side of Pensacola. Escambia Bay is behind me, and you can see some of the trees farther or closer to the bay still beginning to bend just a bit with some of those gustier winds. Last night and yesterday, when they were bending, many of them were breaking, and we do have a lot of trees down, damage to many homes, and also many roads are blocked. Heavy rain also a big factor with this. As much as 17 inches of rain reported in downtown Pensacola. Widespread flooding, and many roads are closed. Some of them are even washed out at this hour. Behind me to my right is Interstate 10, the bridge there. That does remain open. However, the bridges to the beaches are closed. The emergency management personnel is sending a team over to the beaches this morning, to Pensacola Beach, all of Santa Rosa Island, and Perdido Key, to assess the damage there until they make the report and see if it is safe for residents to return. They are not going to reopen those bridges. Now let's go ahead and toss to Bill Keneally in New Orleans.
All right, Kristen, thanks a lot. Again, I think collectively I can speak for the population here. We're feeling quite a sigh of relief as we've had wind, yes. We've had some damage, yes. Some power outages, but not much in the way of heavy rain. That was really the greatest fear here, especially inside the city limits, as the capabilities of the pumps we thought would be tested, but we've only had, I'd say 1 to 2 inches of rain over the course of the hurricane, starting at dawn yesterday through the daybreak hour today. Let's take a quick pan around, and you can see out over the waterfront here. This is the Mississippi River, of course, and we do have northwest winds here, gusting at times 45 to occasionally 50 or 55 miles per hour. A little bit of damage around. I see an awning that's kind of shaken loose there. This is all in the foreground, by the way, the Riverwalk area running along the Mississippi, but outside of that and outside of a few trees down, and yes, power outages on the order of 100,000 customers, we are faring pretty well here. We'll watch the rain, but hopefully it's not going to be near as bad as it is farther to our east. So right now we'll take it back to Rick Griffin.
That's Bill Keneally in New Orleans, Louisiana. Well, also in the state of Louisiana, we have live on the phone with us this morning Sergeant Howard MYKE of the Louisiana State Police. Sergeant MYKE, thanks for joining us. What are you telling folks to do this morning?
Well, first of all, people who have evacuated, who have sought shelter in other areas of the state, we're asking them to stay in place to give us some time to evaluate the situation after daylight. We're starting to get flooded with calls from people who are wanting to come back home to check on their property. Even though the storm has missed New Orleans, it's gone to the east, there's still some gusty winds and heavy rains in certain areas. We've had flooding in other parishes, especially to the southeast of New Orleans and on the North Shore. The power lines are down. We're just asking people to stay in place until we can evaluate the situation. Command staff in Baton Rouge will be meeting later on this morning to evaluate the situation, to decide when they're going to start letting people go back in these closed areas.
All right, that's Sergeant Howard MYKE with the Louisiana State Police. Thank you, sir, for that update. In the New Orleans area, apparently most of the major interstates are still closed. The airport is having problems. We'll keep you up to date on that situation as the morning unfolds. How about in Alabama? Well, in the state of Alabama, winds have ripped the siding off homes near the coast, but the worst problem coming up may be the heavy rainfall. There are flood warnings and watches posted. Some areas are already swamped. Alabama Power, by the way, has reported at least 55,000 people have lost electricity, and more than 2,500 people are huddled in shelters. Over in the state of Florida, in the Panhandle, high surf on top of a storm surge pounded the barrier islands, threatening to undermine foundations of beachfront homes. Parts of Interstate 10 near the Alabama border have been washed out. Thousands of people are without power. A tornado watch continues, and local authorities suspect it was tornadic activity that damaged roofs in the area. Earlier, by the way, a thunderstorm wind gust of 85 miles per hour at Eglin Air Force Base, and this just in, a tornado warning is in effect for Harrison County. That's over in southern sections of Mississippi. That warning in effect until 7:15 Central Daylight Time. Now we go to Dr. Steve Lyons, our hurricane expert. Of course, Steve, severe thunderstorms and tornadoes, one major concern now is George. What are the other potential major impacts the next couple of days?
Rain is by far the most important impact right now. If you're living well inland and you're wondering what's coming your way, keep in mind that the hurricane force winds for a hurricane of this strength are going to last probably only about 4 to 6 hours over land. And the current speed of motion, that means hurricane force winds are likely to be only within about 60 miles of the coast. Now keep in mind that means sustained winds of hurricane force that we're talking about. You could easily get hurricane force gusts well inland associated with the severe weather. Tropical storm force winds, on the other hand, could extend well inland upwards of about 200 miles over the next several days. But those winds are typically not damaging to homes. Only the hurricane force winds are.
Well, the steering currents are very weak above Hurricane George. Where do you expect it to go? How fast is it going to move? Is there a slowing of the forward movement?
Well, Mark Mancuso just brought over some rain totals here. Pensacola Naval Air Station has got 11 inches already recorded in the bucket there. So that's the largest we've seen from a measured rain gauge so far. But overall, we think the system is going to continue to move off to the north and then off to the northeast. And once it gets out of within about 250 miles of the coast, it should start to accelerate to the northeast once it gets into the westerlies. The real question is it going to hang on here before it gets caught up in those? And right now, it's continuing to move to the north, not at a very good clip, but at least it's moving. And we haven't seen it stall yet and become stationary. That's the worst case scenario, because if that happens, it could linger there for another 24 hours before it takes that northeast turn.